Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So today's webinar then is a very exciting one. Of course, they all are, to be fair, but this one is extremely so because we're going to dive in deep into what's going to be the one biggest thing that is going to make a difference to your child's learning. What's going to help them to up-level all of their grades? What's going to have the biggest impact? Now, many of you might be thinking that it's to do with, learning how to revise better, minimizing distractions. Now, of course, all of those things are useful. They are definitely helpful, but it's not the one big thing. And just give me one moment. My kitten Beerus has a toy, so I'm going to just switch it off because I can hear it in the background. I think he was enjoying it, so he is looking quite perturbed right now, I have to say. Where is he? Yeah, I think I might have to turn it back on. I'm sorry, guys. But if you hear a motorized sound in the background, that is what's going on. There you go, everyone. Yeah, he's enjoying chasing it around. And actually, that's what I wanted to kind of talk to you about. We see it. I see a lot of time where parents and kids, they want to help improve their teens and child's grades, and I can see them chasing around many different things, and as a result it ends up being like that toy, actually a lot of noise, a lot of chaos. So what is the one biggest thing that's going to help your child, to help your teen up level their grades? Well, it's grammar. Grammar is going to help your child or your teen to up level their entire grades in all of their subjects. And I know that that seems like a sweeping statement, but let me put it like this. If your child is doing their GCSEs, then they are being marked on their grammar, their spelling, their punctuation, spelling, punctuation, and grammar, and pretty much all of their subjects. In science, which is seen as almost the complete opposite to English, right? It's on the different end of the spectrum, requires them to be able to use SPAG correctly. In fact, they get up to 8 marks. That can be the difference between a grade 8 and 9, a grade 6 and a 7, a 4 and a 5, a 3 and a 4. So it's really important when you break it down to see how actually losing those marks can be quite detrimental to a grade. And even beyond the exam, when your child is writing an application for sixth form, for college, for university, they need to be able to write in grammatically correct sentences. And even beyond that, even further, let's say they're going for a job interview or they're liaising with somebody, they need to be able to speak correctly. Why? Well, whether we like it or not, people are judging. Employees, customers, they are judging. University staff, why? Because we can tell a lot about somebody's grammar. Now, I'm not saying that in formal settings that you need to speak grammatically correct all the time. Of course not. Even I don't, because it's not required, okay? It isn't necessary there. But they need to be able to understand and master grammar so that they can be deliberate with how they use it in different situations. Because regardless of whether we like to admit it or not, if we see a grammatical error in a piece of writing, even if what they're saying, the content looks good, we are probably not going to go for it. Why? Because it doesn't lend itself to authority. It makes us feel, well, actually, if they can be a little bit slack on there, what other areas will they be being slack on? So grammar is really important. And I know often grammar gets tarnished for being dry and boring, but it doesn't have to be. So tonight we are going to dispel all the myths about grammar, and I'm going to take you through why it's so important, what grammar actually means, and some different strategies to help your teen and child to up level their grammar, because this is going to be the one crucial thing that will help them not only in English, but also their other subjects and beyond that. So let me share my screen with you. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. So what is grammar? So what is grammar? What people typically think grammar is, they think it's the rules of a language. They think it's fixed and permanent, and that it gives structure to sentences. Now, all of those, if you're thinking that, then you're not completely wrong, but you're not exactly right either. Grammar actually is a system to structure language. It's a way to communicate meaning. Grammar isn't about rules. It's about actually conveying and expressing ideas coherently. And it's fluid, it changes. Grammar changes, it's dynamic. There's no such thing as the rules of a language. It's made up, okay? And so things that we think are grammatically correct aren't necessarily the case. It's just what people at a time have said is correct, but it doesn't mean it's true for today. So an example of a change in grammatical rules, or not a change there, an example of a change in grammatical rules then would be, in the past, you might have been told never split in an infinitive, never split in an infinitive. And in fact, it's still, told today. If anyone watches The Big Bang Theory, I like The Big Bang Theory. Sheldon, one of the characters, often criticizes another character, Penny, for splitting infinitives. And if he were living in the 19th century, he would be correct to say this. And for those who don't know, an infinitive is a verb used with to. So for example, to eat, to drink, or to think, okay? So it's when you use to with a verb. And the rule, never split an infinitive, would mean that you would write sentences such as, I would like to eat my sandwich now. I'm going to think about what I've done. He is going to do his homework, which makes sense. All of those sentences are clear and they make sense, right? But fast forward to today, we split infinitives all the time. Now, some people might say that you shouldn't split an infinitive in academic settings, but that's not necessarily the case. Researchers have shown that actually it's become so prolific that it's seen as okay to do. It's not seen as a sign of lacking education or not understanding grammar, because it doesn't have that meaning anymore. So for example, to boldly go where no one has gone before, from Star Trek, okay? To boldly go, it should be to go, but we've split it by putting the adverb boldly, okay? To painfully, to painfully listen to music, okay? Painfully again would be splitting the infinitive, okay? So nowadays it's more acceptable to do so. This is an example of how a grammatical rule has changed, and it is not a bad thing, because language is always developing, evolving, and changing. It's fluid, it's not fixed. So why is knowing grammar useful? Well, it helps to structure your writing and speech in a coherent manner. It helps students to deepen their analysis of texts and speeches, and it helps to convey meaning with clarity. So it's a bit of a, almost a double-edged sword here. So on the one hand, you don't want to be a stickler for grammatical rules because they're non-existent anyway, but at the same time, they are there and they serve a purpose to help create a standardization so that we're able to understand one another, okay? So for example, these are examples from a newspaper headlines. And again, I should say apologies for the violence here, but they are newspaper headlines. So police shoot rioting people shot by police, rioting people shot. Now, if you break this down in terms of a grammatical standpoint, let's have a look. Police shoot rioting people. Where is the emphasis? Well, it's on police, right? And so they are seen as responsible. They are seen as the ones in the wrong. They are taking on the active role here. And the second point, rioting people shot by police. Where is the emphasis there? Again, it's the rioting people here, right? So by putting the emphasis there, it makes it seem as though perhaps they're responsible for what's happened. And then the last one, writing people shop. We're not even told who by or any context here. And it has a very different feel from the other two, right? Because the emphasis is actually on the verb shop. And so it seems more alarming and intriguing at the same time. So can you see how actually grammar has a really important role in helping to convey and express ideas? And so it's really important to understand that so that you can use grammar to your advantage. So what does grammar actually mean? So we're going to break it down so you can take it on a word level. So there are only 8 word classes. There are only 8 word classes in the English language: nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. Now, within these 8 word classes, we can break them down further. So for example, nouns, you can have a proper noun, a concrete noun, a collective noun, an abstract noun, a common noun. Verbs, you can have auxiliary a verb, you can have modal verbs, you can have dynamic, you can have transitive, intransitive, so, and stative. So you can break these down. Why is this useful? Well, if you can learn the 8 word classes and go through that with your child, then it makes it more manageable. And then you can hone in and niche down further so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And it helps them then to be able to see the value in it. These words can be used to create phrases and clauses. And one of the common mistakes I see students make, particularly at GCSE level, is I'll say the phrase shows or the clause shows, but actually there's a difference between them, and understanding that is really crucial. So a phrase has no conjugated verb. So for example, over the rainbow or fall in love. A clause has a conjugated verb. So for example, it is over the rainbow or when I fall in love. And conjugation is a fancy way of saying when a verb changes to give further information about tense, person, or number. So for example, over the rainbow doesn't have anything additional there. Okay, we don't have any information about who's involved, whether it's past, present, or future, number. We don't know anything. The same with fall in love. Whereas if we compare that to a clause, it is over the rainbow. We have tense is, we have it and the. So we have a sense of number 2, right? When I fall in love, we've got person I. So it gives us more context, okay? So those are the differences between clause and phrase. And that's really important to understand because that will help when analyzing text in detail. And it also will help students, quite often again at primary level, I see students who do not write in full clauses. And so they just write phrases, thinking it's a sentence, thinking it makes sense. And it doesn't because it's fragmented, doesn't have that information that's necessary to help give clarity to the reader. Then again, on word level, we have morphology, how words are built. Morphology is a fancy way of saying how words are built from smaller units. A morpheme then is the minimal linguistic unit that has meaning and grammatical function. And let me break that down further. So for example, we have 3 morphemes. These are functional. Their use is mostly for serving, for example, but, because, to. Okay, so functional is when they have a purpose, they serve a particular point. So it could be, in this case, with conjunctions to link, phrases or clauses together. And lexical, the morphemes have inherent meaning. So for example, girl, tiger, man. So functional is when it's used to serve a purpose, but lexical is when it has inherent meaning. A bound morpheme can be inflectional. So there's no change in its lexical category. So for example, if we go from talk to talked to talking, it still means the same thing, right? It just tells us the tense. Whereas derivational means that it changes the lexical category. So for example, govern, if we add that to meant, it becomes government. Government is a different category, a lexical category than govern, okay? So why is this useful to know? Because again, it helps your child to break down the words so that they can decipher the meaning. So if they're reading something and they're not sure, they can break it down into the morphemes and so help them to understand what a word means. And it's also important for analysis. So let me help you to see that here. So this is an analysis of extracts taken from the account of the sinking of the Titanic. So we've got 2 here, okay? And we want to answer this question. So I've helped to just zoom in on the grammatical, what's the word I'm looking for there? So the grammatical unit that I want us to focus on to demonstrate how powerful it is. So we've got something called transitive and intransitive verbs. What that means is transitive verbs, they only make sense when we know the subject of the action it's being done to. So for example, please bring the coffee. Please bring coffee. Okay, that makes sense, right? You wouldn't have just please bring, because you'll be thinking, please bring what, right? So it only makes sense, bring, that verb, that transitive verb only makes sense with coffee, which is the object. An intransitive verb is a verb that doesn't need to exert any action on an object. So they ate, that makes sense, it's clear. The dog ran, yeah, ran. We don't need to know any further information to make sense, right? So we're going to look and pay attention to the transitive and intransitive verbs used in these accounts of the Titanic sinking to see what effect it has and which one shows a greater level of causality and a clearer picture of responsibility. Now, this seems quite innocuous, doesn't it, with the verbs like transitive and intransitive? It seems like, well, they're just there because you need to have a verb, right, in the sentence. But you can see that actually it moves beyond functional and helps to understand what the tone is, what is the writer's perspective and point of view, and actually has an effect on us, the reader. So let's have a look at this. The immense icebergs drifted slowly across the ocean. The ship's band played as the rich and poor prayed. A minute later, the light went out and the stern of the ship rose in the air. It stood almost vertically for 30 seconds. So here you can see that there's a greater use of intransitive verbs, verbs that don't need an don't require an object for the action. Okay, but now let's look at the second one. Moody ordered a sharp turn to starboard and to reverse the engines. Amid the crush, a passenger calling himself Michael Hoffman passed his 2 young sons through the human chain into the boat. Captain Smith alerted these officers and ordered an iceberg watch from the crow's nest, but never slackened the ship's speed of 22 knots. So you can see in this one, it uses more transitive verbs. So again, you might want to make a note then. What effect does the choice of verbs have on the impression created of the disaster? Which extract conveys the clearest sense of causality or the clearer picture of responsibility? And if you watch this in the replay, pause it and write your answers down. Okay, so which one do you think? Well, it's clearly the second one, isn't it? Not because of the content, but because of the choice of verbs. You can see with the use of transitive verbs, it relies on an action to be done to an object. So can you see how that lends itself to causality? And we can see then the responsibility of each of the actions, right? So can you see how the choice of verbs is very powerful in not only functional, but serving a purpose for creating meaning? So in the second one, we get the sense that it's because engines haven't been reversed, because in fact, the speed hasn't been reduced, it hasn't been slackened for the disaster. Okay, we can see the tragedy of a man, Michael Hoffman, passing his children, into a boat to be saved because of the events that are happening, because the engines didn't stop or reverse in time, right? So does that make sense? So how then can we help our kids to revise grammar. We'll discuss the importance of grammar. Grammar often gets a bad reputation for being boring and dull, and it isn't. Grammar is dynamic, it's alive, and it's really crucial. Go through the real exciting meaning of grammar, just like we did here. Look at headlines and look at the word order, the morphemes. How are they being used to create the writer's tone? And what's the effect on the reader? Make flashcards so that you can revise the terms, because there are a lot of terms, this is really technical, as it were. And make it meaningful to them. Show them how actually having good grammar can convey meaning, convey ideas, so that they can see actually being able to master this craft, and it is a craft, can help them to be deliberate in their choices. And so that way, then they're able to create the impact that they want, not only in their writing, but in their speaking too, which is powerful and exciting. Who wouldn't want to be able to do that, right? So I'm going to stop there. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, because I know that grammar can be, a little bit confusing, but it doesn't have to be. Break it down. And there's only 8 word classes. So in the comments, drop me a comment about your biggest takeaway. If there's anything that you want clarifying, message in the comments as well, so that I can see that if there's anything specific that you would like some more help on. And remember, bring this to life to your child, because this is the one crucial thing that is going to help your teen, your child, to up-level their grade, not only in English, but in all the other subjects. But more important than that, beyond that, when they're applying for work, when they're applying for internships, apprenticeships, applications for university, it's really important. And even if they don't decide to study English or use anything to do with that, it's still important for medicine. Nobody's going to trust a doctor, a surgeon, a pharmacist who doesn't write in grammatically correct sentences, because it makes it seem like they're careless. Okay, so regardless of our personal feelings about it, let's get behind grammar, because it's really crucial in, as I said, as you've learned today, I hope, in expressing yourself clearly and meaningfully. Have a fantastic evening. And remember, let me know in the comments your biggest takeaway. If there's anything that you want clarifying or any questions or comments, let me know. Otherwise, bye for now.